Ladies and gentlemen, I am Chan Pamasampong, Udit Mang from 3840 O'Malley Road. I would like to chanting for Bill back on a little bit. Please listen. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho. Vichācarana sampanno sukhato lokavidu. Anuttaro bodhisattva sarati sattva manusanang buddho bhagavati. Svakhato bhagavata dhammo santitiko akariko ipasiko. Opanayiko paccattang veditapo vinyuhiti. Supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho. Ucupatipanno bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho. Yaya patipanno bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho. Samiji patipanno bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho. Yatitang cattari bodhisayukkhani atta bodhisattva. Esa bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho. Ahunayo pahunayo takinayo anshari karaniyo. Anuttarang punya keta rogasati. Thank you for listening.
Sweet and weary head. Night is falling. You have come to journey's end. Sleep now. Dream of the ones who came before. They are calling from across the distant shore. Why do you weep? What are those tears upon your face? Soon you will see. All of your fears will pass away, safe in my arms. You're only sleeping. What can you see on the horizon? Why do the white gulls call? Across the sea, a pale moon rises. The ships have come to carry you home, and all will turn to silver glass. A light on the water, gray ships pass into the west. Thank you.
I met Bill in the 1980s when I lived in Barrow, or Utqiagvik as it's called now, and I worked in a little TV studio there. And Bill came up, he was working for National Geographic, and he was doing a film on polar bears. And he stopped by the studio on his way out on the ice, as frequently people would do. And he had a little blue sled with him, a little fiberglass sled that he would load all of his equipment on. And he asked for a ride out to the edge of town, which was only 2 or 3 miles, out to the jumbled ice pack, which is like, office building sized pieces of ice laying on their side, and incredibly treacherous terrain. And in the studio, when we'd go out on the ice, it was a big deal. We had 4 snow machines and these big sleds that were loaded up with equipment that were ratchet strapped onto it. And frankly, the last thing I wanted to encounter was a polar bear. But Bill put on some ice cleats on the bottom of his boots and took his camera and the tripod and threw it over his shoulder like a vagabond, and he walked out on the ice by himself. He did have a gun, he had a handgun, and he was hunting, but he wasn't hunting with a gun, he was hunting with his camera, which was just remarkable. I've never seen somebody interface with nature that way. And he had a white parka cover called a cotiganacy, so that the bears couldn't see him coming. And it was just, it was just an inspiration to me to see the way that he worked. And I got to see the footage years later, actually, and it was amazing. I mean, he was within a stone's throw, oftentimes, of hungry polar bears who would, just as soon eat him as look at him. And that was part of Bill's magic. He had an inner innocence to him that was indescribable. And I'll give you an example. If you said, "Hey Bill, somebody in Talkeetna said they saw Sasquatch," Bill would say, "Oh, let me get my camera. Let's go track it down." And it wasn't that he was naive or gullible. He was actually a very sophisticated guy, very well read. But the innocence inside of him and the purity, that's what it was. It was purity. It wasn't naivete at all. And he did a film once on mountain goats, to give you an example of some of his work and his ethic. So, and I got to see the footage. I wasn't on the shoot with him, but as soon as it came back from the lab, I got to watch it with him, which is the most exciting time for a filmmaker, is when you get to see what you were able to do. So, the first shot's looking up at this enormous mountain. He kind of pans across it from right to left, and you see some little white dots up at the top that presumably are mountain goats. Then the next shot, he's about 1/3 of the way up the mountain, because he climbed up the mountain, with his camera. And the goats are a little bigger. And then the next shot, now you can see a full body of the goat. Then in the next shot, the goat's head fills the frame. Then in the next shot, he's at eye level with the goat, so he had to have been sitting down. He wasn't even standing up. He was literally sitting down among the mountain goats. I've never seen anything like that. One of the goats walked up and started to lick the front of his lens. And the whole shot started moving back and forth, which was uncharacteristic for Bill. He was an excellent cinematographer. He told me it was because one of the goats were licking the back of his head while he was trying. So now he's the goat man in one of his many incarnations. But animals trusted Bill implicitly. Our own dog and cat did. He was a friend of the family for many years. And one other example, a little anecdote, he was making a film on Kermode bears, which are a very, very rare albino black bear. They have no pigment, so they're very white. They were rumored to exist, and somebody told Bill they'd seen one. So of course he jumped in his truck and off he went. And he found it. So as usual, there's footage from 100 meters, then 50 meters, then 20 meters, and then he's right on top of the thing, shooting it. Then you see the cave, the bear's cave. And the bear comes out of the cave and looks at Bill and does a false charge. I would have wet my pants and run. He didn't flinch, not a movement out of Bill. Then there's literally footage inside the cave. He went in the cave with this bear, who, presumably he was not well acquainted with. And the bear had a baby. It was a pregnant sow, it turns out. And he has footage, close-up footage of a baby coming out of this thing. And finally I couldn't take it anymore. I said, Jesus, Bill, what did you live in the cave with the bear? And he said, oh yeah, for about 2 weeks. So that was his connection that he had. And obviously, it's obvious why Disney would want to have him shoot their animal films. So anyway, he had a pureness and a spirit about him. And you know, the world can be a dark and cynical place. That wasn't the world that Bill lived in. He lived in a world of hope and peace. And he expressed that through everything he did. He was in World War II. He served on a destroyer called the USS Connor, D-586. And it was attacked by the Japanese kamikaze pilots. On one occasion, over 130 planes were shooting at him, and he was a gunner's mate, so it was his job to shoot back at them. And when he was telling me that story, he talked about it very, very rarely. We were going through some old pictures once, and he mentioned something about that. And I said, you must have hated him. You must have absolutely hated him. Bill said, no, he said, not at all. He said, I had a deep and abiding respect for them because they believed so strongly in what it was that they were doing. And he said that really began his journey of peace and reconciliation. And you'll see in some of the films when we watch them later, he spent the latter 20 years of his life really as a philanthropist, making films about the downtrodden and the disenfranchised and people that he felt he could help. He did a film in Vietnam called Friendship Village. Friendship Village is a place where veterans, US and Vietnamese veterans, get together to help children that were whose parents were exposed to Agent Orange during World War II. And he told me about the trip. He said, I'm going to go over to Vietnam and shoot something. And it was kind of crass looking back on it, but he did so much work out of his own pocket. I said, you getting paid for that, Bill? He says, no, there's some kids over there and they need some help and I think I can help them. And it was just as simple as that. It was no more complicated than that. And that's what lasts with me. That's when I think fondly back on my time together with him. And then just one last anecdote, and that is Bill and I were on the North Slope one time in a little village called Nuiqsut. Dead of winter, there was about a 2-hour window with daylight where you could film anything. And we were there working. And we got stuck. The snow came up, the planes couldn't come in, and we were stuck in this old man camp, they called it. And Bill called it No Exit, by the way. And we stayed up late, and we played cards, and Bill told stories with the camp crew circled around him. There was no alcohol involved, but it was the best party I've ever been to. And I've never felt more at home. I've never been further from home and felt more at home because Bill was there. As long as Bill was there, everything was going to be cool. I know I said one more, but I have to tell you one more story. Bill and I were in Washington, D.C. one time filming a film called Radioactive Eskimo, and it was sort of a sad film about natives that had been exposed to radiation experiments during the Cold War. And I told Bill the story about what had happened, and it made him mad. I never saw Bill. That wasn't part of his character, but it made him mad. He said, what? They did what? So we went to Washington, D.C., and we filmed these hearings, and when we were done with that, Bill said, hey, let's go walk around town and get some shots. And I said, let's call a cab. He wanted to go shoot the monuments around Washington. Let's get a cab. No, let's just hoof it, he said. Well, he's a pretty long-legged guy. He was a hard guy to keep up with under the best of the circumstances. So as always, he took his camera, threw it over his shoulder like he'd done 1,000 times, and out the front door we went of our hotel, walked around to the different monuments. We get in front of the White House, and he sets up his camera, and he's framing things up, and 3 security guards come from nowhere, foomp out of the bushes. And he said, you can't film here, you gotta have a permit. Bill looked at one of the guys and says, we're amateurs. And they looked at Bill, and they kind of looked at their rule book, and they didn't know what to do, so they kind of all wandered back into the bushes. And I said, wow, Thanks, Bill. He said, we haven't got paid for this job yet, have we? I said, no, not yet. He said, well, we're amateurs. Till the check clears, we're amateurs. So anyway, I could go on and on. He was, like I said, a dear friend of the family. He was Uncle Bill to my kids, and never spoke an ill word in 30 years that I knew him, not once. And you know, in the film business, you get kicked in the head, figuratively and literally. So God knows he would have been well within his rights to disparage someone. He never did, not once, not ever in 30 years. He used to say, when we wake up in the morning, we're all even. That was his, mantra. And so, anyway, I wanted to share that with you to get a sense of, like I said, the very pure spirit that he was. So, and thank you again for coming. I really appreciate it.
I want to thank my friend Reed Bouvet for such thoughtful and kind words about Bill. Don't sweat the small stuff. We're only here for a weekend, and it's Sunday afternoon, Bill would say. Whatever troubles you had, whatever worries you had, Bill had a way of making you feel better. My name is Joel Bennett from Juneau, and I heard him say things like this many times over the years. I first met Bill Bacon in 1977 when I was making a film about Admiralty Island in southeast Alaska. Bill was a veteran filmmaker by then, but he was quick to share his experiences and knowledge with a person just starting out. It proved to be the beginning of a very long friendship. Bill and I were to work on many wildlife films together. Films about caribou north of the Brooks Range, walruses in the Bering Sea, brown bears in Katmai National Park, to name a few. No matter how remote we were, it always seemed like Bill had been there before. And the sheer number of people he knew in those faraway places was staggering. His love and respect for wild Alaska was boundless and contagious. If you were with him out there, all would be good. When I think of Bacon, I think of a man who loomed large, a filmmaker of great stature, a veteran who fought for his country, a crusader for peace in the world, and a loving father. But it was the way Bill lived day to day, how he dealt with the smaller things, that inspired me most. He would often just walk up to somebody on the street, say hello, and ask, "How are you?" I'm convinced he could make a condemned man smile. If you needed something, he would give it to you. If you were sick, he'd do his best to care for you. "I'll send your wife my Max Gearson juicer," he said to me when he learned my wife was ill with cancer. If it was a living thing, large or small, he cared for it. That everything was interconnected, one way or another, was his mantra. The fact is, Bill just plain cared about things. If you knew him, you know that. Bacon once said that every human was funny. Every great human was funny. Well, humor was not something Bill lacked. One time in India, Bill met and interviewed His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. As a gift, Bill presented him with an Alaskan essential, a a Leatherman knife. The Dalai Lama hooped with laughter. Bill knew he loved gadgets, so he convinced him that he could wear it on a sash under his robes. "You might have to fix a snow machine if it crops out someday," he said. That episode became a story in the New York Times. Another time I asked Bill if he'd ever been to Japan. He paused. "Let me think. No, I don't think I have. But I sure got close. I manned a .50 caliber machine gun on the back deck of a Navy destroyer and shot down several Japanese kamikaze planes." Poignantly, the last time I saw Bill, he was proudly wearing his World War II veteran's ball cap. When Bill Bacon gave away possessions, he would usually say, "And you don't owe me nothing. It all comes out even in the end." Well, in the end, Bill surely came out even, and more, much more. Wherever he is, he's doing beautifully. I know this for a fact. Thank you, Bill, and thank you all.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carol Chambers Anderson, and I've known Bill for over 20 years. I first met him when I returned to Alaska from Washington, D.C. That summer, 1997, I was out at Spirit Days at Kincaid Park, and some of my friends convinced me that I should do the blanket toss. I did it, and got flung up into the air, and I heard a man laughing his head off, and I looked down, and here's Bill with a camera, and he came over to me afterwards, and people were making comments about the chichaco flung up on the walrus hide, but we bonded, and it seemed like the friendship was instantaneous. It was very beautiful and pure, and continued for the years that followed. I've been so very blessed to have known Bill. I will be forever inspired by his strong yet gentle humanitarian spirit. And yes, please do count me among the many ladies he encountered in his lifetime who possessed a crush on this craggy-featured, gentle-souled man. I know I am not the first woman to confess a certain fascination upon meeting Bill, even at times feeling like a blundering secret admirer. I guess you could say I had a Bridges of Madison County romantic fantasy complex. But I was just wondering, could I have a show of hands? Any other women ever experienced that? All right, what about men? Any bromances? Any man crushes? I have a feeling if Frank A. Randall was with us today, he'd be waving his hands wildly in the back of the room. So to truly know Bill was to love him. His free spirit, his laughter, and his great quest in life. Oh, and the outrageous true life adventure stories he could tell you. One of my favorite stories of his came from a trek in Tibet. He was on a trail and a large python was spotted. So of course Bill thought of this as a great photo op. He reached down to grab the tail of the snake just as the snake was trying to run off into the jungle. And he began to pull the snake, thinking he's got to get that on camera. He said this snake was much larger than he realized, and as he began pulling, he kept pulling, and then he was worried, maybe it's poisonous, maybe it's going to bite me. So then he pulled it up like a lasso and swung it around his head. He wanted to get enough momentum so he could throw it back in the jungle. And he said at that moment, all the Sherpas were yelling wildly. And according to Bill, those Sherpas were either saying one of two things. They were either saying, "Look at this white god, the all-powerful god of snakes," or they were saying, he's an idiot. He's going to kill us all. Let's get the hell out of here. But I love the stories that Bill could tell. Those treks resulted in 2 brilliant, important films, Tibet, A Moment in Time, and also Tibet Hope, who he produced in collaboration with Brad Swenson. I valued Bill as a mentor. I'll be forever inspired by his deep spirit. I love that he focused his talent and energy in the final decades of his career in life on projects that he considered of ultimate importance in terms of humanitarian endeavors. He was an adventurous pioneer with charisma galore. Bill touched so many people from so many different walks of life in so many different parts of the world, and he lived a life that many could only dream about. Last October, I assisted Bill with hospice care at the request of his daughter Karen. I was deeply honored to vigil and to bring companionship, comfort, and peace to him. On a late Sunday evening, I received a message from Karen, and I was asked to relay it to her father. Just a second. Tell Dad it's okay to go. Go ahead, have a great adventure. Let him know I'll meet him again someday, somewhere up past those northern lights between the stars in heaven. At that time, Bill could no longer speak, but he reached out for my hand and then very gently kissed it, just a gentleman acknowledging that he totally understood his daughter's message. It was such a pure and beautiful moment, and his eyes conveyed, you could see the peace and happiness. A beautiful message, Karen. All the next day and on into the evening, as the hours passed, I was there by Bill's side, listening to music from Tibetan prayer chants to Frank Sinatra love songs. All the details of life around me seemed so exquisite. I was witnessing the first of winter snowflakes swirling in on gusty winds. Clouds were coming in over the mountains from the east, yet there were clear skies to the west and a salmon-colored sky at sunset. So, call it momentary insanity, but I had this sudden desire to immediately take Bill away with me, just drive away in my truck up to the highest peak to watch the final beautiful sunset with him up on a mountaintop. As twilight descended, he gently passed away. May I now please share a poem, a tribute to a phenomenal man. This poem is by Leonard Cohen. There are some men who should have mountains to bear their names to time. Grave markers are not high enough nor green. I had a friend. He lived and died in mighty silence and with dignity. This is not a mourning song, but only the naming of this mountain, dark and softly white, under the pale of mist. I named this mountain after him. The next day, October 24th, I confess I was emotionally exhausted and feeling very empty. I needed the solace of nature to comfort my soul, and I decided upon a long bike ride on the coastal trail. The late autumn, early winter colors in the shimmering sunlight, watching clouds that were just magnificent that day. The entire sky was my own grand cinematic screen, and I played back imagery in my mind of Bill and pictured it all across the sky. There was a dramatic darkening of the sky over the range, yet one shaft of light brilliantly lit a particular mountain in the distance. Subconsciously, I knew that was it, Bill. And I thought, yes, that's the name I'll give that remote mountain. Not Mount Bacon, just Bill. In the time that has followed, I've come to realize that even though sometimes I'll search, I can't always find it. But I know it's there, and I know that Bill is there. In ending, I would like to share a personal message with all of you. It's the same message that Bill shared with me for many, many years. So I hope you're all listening. Adios, amigos. Watch out for sailors and keep your powder dry. Namaste.
I see friends shaking hands saying meet up, that's where you'll find me. Oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, and the dreams that you dare to, oh why can't I?
Well, hello again. So we're going to look at some video and some clips and some highlights of Bill's life. Some of this stuff has never been seen before. It's been held in various film archives, and it, be a reflection of his past. And I want to just say a few words before we get started. And that was that Bill and I worked together many, many times. And in fact, sometimes we were actually competitors. We would both bid on the same job, unknowingly. We would both get requests for proposals. We'd both bid on it, and one or the other of us would get it. But we had a gentleman's agreement that whoever got the job, we'd always hire the other guy as a second cameraman. So it didn't really matter. And more than one time, we've shown up at the same time on a shoot with a very confused-looking client, thinking one of us didn't get the memo. So that was his spirit. And this morning we were able to spread his ashes over the Knik Glacier, and I was able to say goodbye properly to him. And my only regret is that I didn't tell him I loved him more than I did. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to dim the lights and we'll look at some video and some pictures. Let's get started. This is not Bill. I couldn't find a baby picture of him, so I found another one from 1927 that looked like a cute little baby boy. William Warder Bacon III was born March 26, 1927, in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, of Quaker parents. Bill descended from a family that came to America in the mid-17th century, and he attended school on the East Coast until he was 17. This is Bill. That year in 1944, he joined the United States Navy and saw action in the closing days of the Second World War in the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Bill served aboard the USS Connor D-582, which was a Fletcher-class destroyer. He started out as a signalman, which he affectionately referred to as a skivvy waver, and he was also a gunner's mate, and those are the fellows that maintain and operate the guns, and indeed pull the trigger when the time came. He also, by the way, went to college on the GI Bill, and he also served in the Korean War as an officer. After the war, Bill immediately headed north to Alaska, where he got a job as a photographer for the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. Seeking to break the routine of Fairbanks, as he once said, Bill headed north to Barrow, where he spent 2 years filming Inupiat Eskimos hunting, fishing, and whaling. He lived with them for 2 years. He ate what they ate. He told me he lost 70 pounds during that time. This is one of the films that Bill shot in 1947 on Kodachrome film. This is called a Nalukattuk, and it is a whaling feast after a successful whaling season. So it's a 71-year-old film. Most of these people probably aren't with us anymore. Let's just watch this for a minute. You can see the post-World War II garb people are still wearing. Beautiful parkas. Bill used to say that film captured people's spirits. And you know, there are certain folks that won't allow their photograph to be taken for fear that it'll capture their spirit. And technically, that's what's actually happening here. The sunlight reflected off of these people's faces and their clothing and was literally captured through the lens of Bill's camera into the film. And when you would process the film through a chemical process, those photons would then translate to the color and the texture and the skin tones that you see here. So this isn't video, which is a sort of a digital facsimile of the picture. This is actually a mirror image of what those people were. And look at this beautiful dancer. So this is a blanket toss, of course. We've all seen that. But what I didn't realize till Bill told me, there was a practical reason for the blanket toss, other than just celebrations. And that was, there were no ladders in the Arctic. Indeed, there were no trees. There was only driftwood. And if you wanted to get somebody up 20 feet in the air so they could see over the next ice ridge, this is how they did it. You could launch a person 2 stories up in the air and they could actually spot what was going on over the horizon. And so this was actually a very practical technology, if you will, right? That dog's probably got some good leftovers. The Alaska Film Archives, by the way, in Fairbanks came up with this footage and let me use it here tonight. Bill got a call from a friend named Walt Perkins in Southern California, who was then producing a film for Disney Studios entitled The Pigeon That Worked a Miracle. And Walt Perkins offered Bill a job as a cameraman. Bill packed a bag and he brought with him his wolf and his husky dogs to Los Angeles. One day, Walt Disney happened on the set and was impressed with Bill's dogs. In fact, Walt was so impressed that Bill's husky became the star of his next film, Nicky, the Wild Dog of the North. Now, this isn't actually Nicky. This is one of many dogs that were raised up to play the part, because when they made these films, first of all, they called them true life adventures, and by the way, there was nothing true about them. Everything you saw was heavily staged, and it took them as many as 3 or 4 years to complete one of these films. And that's because oftentimes they would show the different seasons, and they would work on 3 or 4 films simultaneously. So it wasn't like they were just working on one. So they had to have the dog at a puppy stage, at a slightly older stage. They had some that were aggressive, some that could do specific tricks. So we'll let Bill pick it up from here in an interview that was done in 1980 with the PBS station KAKM in Anchorage. And this is about a 15-minute clip where Bill talks about some of his experiences with these Disney films, and then we're going to look at some clips of the films that Bill's referring to.
Today's guest on Something to Say has done everything from work with elephants in a traveling circus to wrestling with bears and wolves. He traveled to Alaska with Wrong Way Corrigan, worked in gold mines, coal mines, on railroads and riverboats. He's lived in the Arctic, whaled with an Eskimo whaling crew, had been stranded on the St. Augustine volcano as it was about to blow. You may be wondering what this man does for a living. His name is Bill Bacon, and he's a filmmaker and a photographer, has been for over 30 years. Anyone who's survived all those experiences must have some great stories to tell. Would you start with the years you worked for Walt Disney and what some of those experiences led you to go through?
Well, the most interesting and funniest things that ever happened are the things that no one ever sees, the things that happen behind the camera. And one of the funniest things I think that ever happened when we were doing some filming was it was on a film, Nicky Wild Dog of the North, and this was being shot just outside of Banff National Park in the Kananaskis area. And the Kananaskis River is a fairly large river that flows into the Bow River, and it is a hydroelectric hydroelectric river. That is, it's a series of dams along, and there was very beautiful areas. So we were doing one of our early sequences on the bank of this river, and it was took place in the springtime, and we had built a cave up on the side of it. It looked very nice, and the sequence called for a mother bear and her cub to come out, and the mother sniffs around and looks, and this is the start of spring. So we tried for 3 years to get this shot. We couldn't get a mother bear and her cub because the mother was too nervous, and the fear of her cub running away and things like that. So then we tried a male, a boar, and he would try to kill the cubs. We always had a hard time with that. So we kept putting it off and hoping that something would happen. So finally, we saw in the newspaper where there was a wrestling bear coming through, and a man and his bear would take on any two wrestlers. So we thought, hey, maybe we could use this bear. So we contacted the guy, and he was willing. So he comes out on his on the location with his bear in his cage, and it was a huge bear. And we found out that the bear had never been in the wilds before, born in a zoo, and the guy got him from a cub. So he worked out great. So we got the bear and put him in the cage inside the cave. And then we had the little cub next to him, and all 4 cameras were rolling. We let him out. The bear kind of sniffed around and looked, and we let the little cub out, and the big bear kind of looked at it wondering what it was. He didn't even know.
Never met him before.
No, and so he just kind of looked at it and sniffed around and walked out of frame, which just worked fine. And we got the whole thing, and we were just so relieved that we finally got the shot. Then the big bear walked down, sniffed around, and jumped in the river. And it was, oh my golly, and the owner...
A zoo bear who's totally unused to being out.
That's right. And so the owner says, hey, you better get that bear, I'm going to sue you. Oh my golly, here we go. So I sent up one of the photographers on up to have the water shut off on that particular dam. So then the other fellow we sent down the river. The road kind of went along the river to keep an eye on the bear, and Lloyd Beebe, my filming partner, and I dove in the river after the bear. And we said, we can't let him go, Lloyd. So on the way down, we caught up with the bear, and about 1 mile or 2 down the river, we were trying to throw a noose over the bear's head. We had some nylon parachute cord with us to try to hold him in.
You and Lloyd were swimming along?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Life jackets or just swimming?
No life jackets, just trying to keep up with the bear, and it was pretty swift current. So we came around a big bend in the river, and there was a trout fisherman fly casting right out with waders on, and we went right past him trying to put this noose over the bear, and he kind of looked at us wondering what the heck's going on here. And the bear took off, got on the shore of the opposite side, and got up on the ground. And I said, hey Lloyd, it's now or never, because he can just take off and we can't run after him. So Lloyd got a big loop and threw it over his head and missed. But the bear got his foot in there, and so we had him, and we just held on with his front foot. The bear got mad and took after us. We ran around some trees and got him all snagged up. So we had him there, and the bear was trying to chew the line, and we were hollering for help. And the fellow that had gone down along the river in the pickup truck, we hollered to him to get a heavier line, and at that particular moment the water in the river just stopped. I mean, there was no water in the river. It was just take like the drain plug out. And so he walked across, gave us a big line. We got a line on his neck this time. We started to drag him out. Right in the middle of the riverbed he stopped, the bear, just put his feet, he wouldn't budge. We couldn't pull him. He was about 400 and some pounds. So we got his cage, set it out in the middle of the river, opened the door, pulled the line through out to the back, and we had a Dodge Power Wagon. We just hoisted him right in there, shut the door, backed the truck up, and just got it up. And we were fighting time because they said they could only shut the water off for about 15 minutes because Calgary needed all the power they could get. So we got him loaded, just getting out, and as the truck was pulling out of the dry riverbed, here comes the water. And it was one of those things, you know. And we never thought, you know, about the fisherman all this time who was taking it all in. We didn't even have time to talk to him, and all of a sudden the water came up again. He looked up the river and looked back down, looked at us, and was shaking his head, and he started to take his pole apart and walking out, you know. And as we got up on the bank looking down, we says, "Hey, Lloyd, I wonder what he's going to tell his wife tonight when he gets home."
Better than any fish story.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things happen to you continually.
Yeah. I mean, practically every sequence we worked on, there was something that, you know, I mean, little things that, one of the things we had, a dog was to chase a fox, and the dog had looked down and was watching a fox getting muskrat. It was in the winter, and the dog took after the fox and was chasing him all around trying to get this muskrat because the dog was starving to death. And all of a sudden, the fox stopped, and the dog jumped right over the fox, and then the fox started to chase the dog all around. And, you know, I mean, we couldn't use it, but it was so funny. We found out that the dog and the fox's pens were adjacent, and they became friends through the fence. So they, you know, but we just cut out those parts that we couldn't use. See, so.
Well, those were the years that you worked on a lot of Disney's wildlife films.
Yes.
What kind of influence did Disney have in those days?
Well, it was Disney's, his magic, I say, you know, he had just kind of a charisma, ideas that were just fantastic. He was just so far ahead of his time, and he was a real inspiration to everyone at the studio.
Okay. Then after he died, you no longer worked for Disney?
Well, Lloyd and I stayed on for a while because Walt had so many things that he had programmed ahead, and we worked on quite a few shows after his death, but they were his ideas and his adaptation to the stories that he had gotten.
You also worked for Como TV in Seattle on an Exploration Northwest program.
Yes.
And that led you into more dangerous situations, right?
Oh, yeah.
What would you do in a situation of skydiving or
hang
gliding?
To me, it was fascinating because we'd go with these groups, whatever they were, and we'd live with them and experience it and just become a part of what they were doing. And it's amazing the organizations and groups and things that we traveled with and learned about. There was skydiving, and then the next week would be in a deep dive submarine. It held the world's record, the Pisces. And then we'd go to experimental aircraft.
How would you jerry-rig something? How would you manage? Would you actually get on a hang glider? Would you rig up your camera to it?
Well, some incidents we went right along with them. And sometimes we would rig up cameras. I had a huge box, a couple of boxes that I'd take on every film assignment, and I had these little gazaps, or little motor-driven 16mm magazine cameras, and I could strap those on to hang gliders or onto people's heads. I had a helmet, and I used to use this too, put a helmet and a camera on this side, and had a weight on this side to balance it out, and I could do a lot of things with that. I mean, it's just every time was something new, a new challenge, which was neat, you know.
You also got asked to be an actor at times, or fill in as a stuntman.
Right.
Did you have any training to do that, or you just kind of fell into it?
Just fell into it, and a lot of things were just falling into it. On a lot of the Disney films, it would be like I had to fall in the river. A cougar jumped on me and pushed me in the river, and I was up in the clear water in Idaho, and that water was very cold. It was breakup time. And between that and then I did one on Yellowstone Park, and there was a bear, and I got knocked out of a boat a couple of times, and then on Nicky Wild Dog of the North I had to play the part of the main actor with a dog fight and different things like this. It was always something new, and they just couldn't find actors to do these things. So and one particular show I did was Monado, about a wolverine, and it wasn't a very big part because it was mostly all about the animals, but there was a mean trapper in it. And the mean trapper had to fight a wolverine, and so I had to play that part. Wolverine jumps from a tree right onto the trapper, and that took us a couple of months to train the wolverine to jump on me, and finally we got it so it looked good. And then to make it really intent for the wolverine, I sewed meat on back of my parka and didn't feed the animal for about a week, and then he was really hungry, so he tried to get the meat off, and I was trying to pull him off of it, and he was really hungry, so he hung right on, and then I got knocked down, and I rolled down the side of a mountain, and there's, you know, it's just the Disney type of stuff.
How much time do you have to either experiment or to check out what the situation was going to be in order to tell how dangerous it was going to be or how to get out of it?
Well, sometimes it's just a one-shot deal. Like on Charlie the Lonesome Cougar, I had to ride a log down a flume, and it went for about 9 miles and dropped about 3,000 feet. So we were really going quite a speed down this flume, and it went right over the Columbia River drop-off. Sometimes it was over 1,000 feet straight down, and sometimes the logs did break the flume, so they would dump out. So it was, you know, it's one of these one-shot deals.
Do it right the first time. You never got seriously hurt?
Not seriously hurt. I got chewed up a number of times, and I got scars here and around my eye, and just about lost an ear one time with a couple of things. But I mean, it was just normal. Part of
the work. Did you ever get asked to do anything that was either too dangerous that you in your own judgment didn't think was
no,
right to do?
Not at the time, but as I was working on it, I kept asking myself, what am I doing here? I did a film, Climb on Mount McKinley, and it was a traverse. That means you start on one side and climb right over. And we used dog teams to haul the supplies up. It needed quite a bit of supplies, and then a certain spot, then they just went from there and right up over. And I followed them right up, not to the summit, but on just about up to the summit, and then they went over, and they had cameras with them, and I showed them how to operate them, and I came back out the other way. And there was a few crevasses that had me worried. I fell in one of them, and we were always roped up, and this time the rope they had gone and then swung back right along the crevasse, and my rope was right in the crevasse, and I started going down, and I was hollering to them, and they belayed and I got out of it. But
So were you actually hanging inside
Yeah.
the crevasse for a
Yeah.
while? Did you have your camera running?
no, not that particular time, but not as I was going down, but when I was down there, I shot some neat scenes of them coming up, and then when I knew I was safe, I had them jump back and forth and got some nice angles from down in the crevasse.
Good Lord. So we're going to take a look at some of these Disney clips, and I just want to set this up a little bit. Nicky Wild Dog of the North, you'll see a scene, and I'll point it out to you. It's actually fairly brief, where Bill doubles for the main actor in the film when he's getting mauled by a dog. And so I'll show you that. So Monado the Wolverine, remember Bill said, oh, I just played a little part in it. It wasn't really, you know. The whole movie is about Bill. Bill plays the trapper. He is exclusively, from soup to nuts, the guy in the movie. He's it. And it's a great story. You should really, you know, look it up if you can find it. I don't know if Amazon or somebody's got it, but it's a brilliant film. And essentially the gist of it is this trapper shows up, which is Bill. He sets all of his traps, and the Wolverine completely screws him over in every way. He drops logs into his traps to set his traps. He steals Bill's food. Bill hides it in a cache, and the Wolverine, how they trained Wolverines or any of these animals, you'll see a bear driving a boat, you know, in one of these shots. Anyway, I mean, the Wolverine did everything but burn the cabin down by the end of the movie, and poor Bill, he stole Bill's gun. There's a scene where Bill takes his .44 and the holster for it and hangs it up on a tree. And you can see the Wolverine climbs up, and you think, oh, they've rigged this some way, so the Wolverine tugs on the gun and it falls off. Well, in fact, Wolverine climbs up above where the gun was, comes back down at it, lifts it up and off of the limb that it was on, drops it to the ground, jumps down, grabs the gun belt, and throws it in the river. So that's when I said nothing about these movies is true, right? But it was just remarkable what they were able to train these animals to do. And you could see why it would take many years for them to do that. So anyway, in Monado, despite Bill's shucks, you know, description of it, he starred in the movie from one end to the other. Then there's a clip from Charlie the Lonesome Cougar, fairly short clip. This was the logging film he was talking about. The shot he was talking about on the log flume, they wanted a point of view of what it must feel like to be one of these logs going down a flume at 30 miles an hour. So Bill climbed on it and straddled it with his camera, and off he went. And then the last one is Yellowstone Cubs. And, you know, I watched these when I was a kid at the Fireweed Theater. Had no idea what I was seeing. They were like cartoons. I accepted that a bear could start a boat and drive it around and jump over logs. But of course they could. It's a cartoon. But, you know, Bill was an incredible animal trainer. That was one of his jobs when they would hire him on. Sometimes for months or even years preceding one of these films, Bill would get these storyboards. And it'd say all kinds of goofy things. You know, the bear has to do this or that. And it was up to Bill to figure out how to do that. So here is a little compilation of about 5 minutes of Bill's Disney movies.
Nicky! No, Nicky, no! Nicky! Steady.
This is a tale of the far north. A story the Indians love to tell around the campfire on long winter nights. It's the legend of Minado the Wolverine. Minado the hunter, the trapper's enemy and the Indian's friend. Hello, the cab! Hello! To the Wolverines, the newcomer was unnecessarily noisy, constantly shattering the stillness of their peaceful woods. Hello! The cab! Hello! They studied the man with interest. Apparently, he was seeking some sort of a hideaway, or as an animal might, some sort of burrow or den. This one appeared to be about what he had in mind. He rearranged it a bit, as any creature might, but on the whole seemed to accept it for his purpose. Alarmed by what sounded like a rifle, Minado sped home. The trapper had waited a long time for this moment. He wanted to make doubly sure he'd finished off his foe. He hadn't yet realized there were two. And now it was fang and claw. The animal trying for the kill, the man desperately trying to save himself.
Charlie, lonesome Charlie.
Talking about Charlie, it's a natural fact that cat didn't know how a cat should act. He figured he was the human kind when all the time he'd been designed to be a cougar.
Talking about Charlie, good time Charlie, everybody's friend.
He didn't dig that nature scene. Those grizzly bears were too darn mean. He figured his rightful fitting place was kicking around with the human race. Lumberjacks, mostly.
Talking about Charlie, good time Charlie, everybody's friend.
How come he was lonesome? Well, that's a story we're here to tell. So let's get started right from the top. When we come to the end, we'll stop. Charlie had left one problem behind, only to head straight for another. This cook was a new man. He'd never even heard of Good Time Charlie. Well, he was about to make his acquaintance.
Cougar! Yeah, I know. There's a cougar! Charlie? Charlie? Hold on, Charlie.
sun. On the double, making tracks for trouble, never caring, just calling trouble fun. The Cubs felt they were welcome everywhere, and they meant to join the folks at the table. But Tubby's sensitive nose picked up the tantalizing odor of fish. They never hesitated to help themselves to anything, anytime. And with the prospect of fresh trout for breakfast, it was gangway for the galley.
Hey! What's going on? Stop! Come back here! Stop! Hey!
This fisherman would have quite a tale to tell about the boat that got away. And he just filled it with gas, too. Of course, the only reason for being here was food, and when Tuffy got away with that, there was only one thing for Tubby to do: settle for sightseeing. The course they were on was just about perfect for looking around. Well, a few shakedown maneuvers straightened things out. Then Tubby figured he might as well wash his paws as long as he was out here anyway. Then Tuffy finished eating and wanted a drink, but he was a little short on scuba. Up here. Some pleasure boaters just have no regard for fishermen. Tuffy decided the man looked friendly. Avast! Port your helm and come about! Must have cut that a little too fine. Come about again, me hearties.
So, among the films that Bill did, he worked with a fellow named Dale Johnson, and Bill did about a dozen films on the national parks all over the U.S. And they were beautifully done films. In hindsight, I'll show you a little clip here from a film about the Grand Canyon, and it's pretty sweet.
In these wind-scarred spaces, solitude can be the nurturing element for some visitors. Maybe the very reason for coming to this place for some people. Solitude is a precious quality, even here in the Grand Canyon. But there are still secret places where a hiker can test his ability to spend some time alone, some time in his own company. He carries 2 gallons of water in his pack. Without it, he would risk death. A lonely hike can afford the most intimate experience with the natural world for those who are looking for this. A glimpse at the private life of a family of nesting birds seems a rare privilege when discovered alone. Something known only by you, perhaps not easily shared. In these arid canyons, the agave has lived 15 to 25 years. It has never borne seed. Now it blooms, this one time only, and then it will die. The secret trail you take should not be too secret. Someone should know your general vicinity, in case there's trouble, in case you need help, in case you surprise a rattlesnake. She is retiring and usually quite harmless. These canyons are arid, but sometimes there can be another surprise, a hidden spring, exciting that sense of personal discovery once again. Quite an amazing secret in these dry places, flowing right out of the wall of the canyon. But where does the trail lead? You keep looking. You follow it to the end. For some, this too is part of a personal journey of discovery. Today, the trail ends at a drop of 500 feet. Below that, another precipice of 1,000 feet. In these spaces, a person can experience something larger and greater than himself. Something much larger. And perhaps we can gain some perspective about our real significance in this universe. Because in these environs, a man can disappear into the landscape as easily as an insect.
These films are sort of timeless, so you'll still see these show up on PBS from time to time. Trailwood Films is the name of the production company that Dale Johnson has, and I want to thank him for making that clip available to us. Yeah, absolutely. So this is at my house early on. I had a business in Anchorage where I would scan motion picture film and convert it into digital video. And the reason that you do that is because you had the 2 advantages. You could shoot your movie on film, which had much more texture and color than the video of the day, but you could edit on video because editing film was inherently destructive. That is, you had to take scissors and physically cut the film apart, glue it back together in the order in which you wanted to use it, and if you later changed your mind, it was too late. That clip is on the floor. They call that the cutting room floor, right? So what Bill would do, what I would do also, because we both shot film, as soon as a roll came back from the laboratory, which was in Seattle, Ford Labs in Seattle was the nearest laboratory. So as soon as a roll would come back, Bill would run right over to my place. I'd thread it up in the projector you see there on the left, and we'd watch it on the monitor. That's Bill right there looking at some footage that we shot in Nuiqsut that I was talking about. And it turned out it was pretty good looking footage, as you can see on his face. That's my little boy Eric at about the age of 2 over there with 2 film rewinders. He loved being in the room, so I'd give him some blank leader and he'd get over there and do that. This is Bill and I working on a film called A Christmas in Spenard, and Bill helped me shoot it. It was just a little silly kind of a short film that we made, but you know, he He really helped. I learned, in all honesty, 2/3 of what I know about making films I learned from Bill. And I'll give you one example. In many of Bill's films, you would see a pan across a horizon. But to do that as a human being holding onto a tripod handle is just about impossible. We don't, humans just aren't very good at accelerating up to a specific speed and then letting off on the other end. So I was on a shoot once with Bill, and we had to do a pan of this mountainside. And he reached into one of his pockets and pulled up a couple of old rubber bands that were tied together. And what he'd do is hook the rubber band on the back of the tripod handle and grab it and pull on it. Well, for a while, nothing happens. And then slowly, ever so slowly, the pan would begin. And even if your hand's jerking a little bit, you're insulated with that rubber band between you and the tripod handle. It would make an absolute perfect pan. And then when he got done, he would stop his hand. And as the last slack would contract out of the rubber band, the thing would coast to a perfect stop. And those were just, he had 101 of those little tricks. And so I, of course, stole that immediately from him and forever have a pair of rubber bands in my pocket. Bill was always a guest at our house during Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter and any time we could get him to come over. And we discovered that Whoppers was his Achilles heel. So there you see, he's pretty excited. That's my father, Wayne, who's passed, and myself there on the left. Oh, and there's little Eric, lower right, as usual. There he is with my boys. That's Eric on the left and little Christopher on the right. Uncle Bill. So this is when we were in Washington, D.C. I told you about the film called Radioactive Eskimo. The last 20 years of Bill's life, he was a philanthropist. He made films about people that had been abused in one way or another, or that he thought that he could help. And so, this isn't as upbeat as the stuff I've showed you up till now, but it's important to see this. These are the critical films that Bill made in the latter years of his life, and then I'll just follow up for a minute after we watch the clip.
This is the Eskimo village of Anaktuvik Pass, high in the mountains of Alaska's Brooks Range. The people living here today live in a world of age-old tradition and modern technology.
Morning, morning. School bus for easy, 4 on round, back to 10.
The children of Anaktuvik have inherited the legacy of their elders, but they have also inherited the legacy of the U.S. military's Cold War. In the spring of 1956, doctors doing research for the U.S. Air Force came to Anaktuvik Pass. They had chosen the people here and in 5 other Alaskan villages as subjects for human radiation experiments.
There weren't that many white people or anybody that strangers comes into our village, and they were here. They were strangers.
As a young girl, Rachel Riley had watched as her friends and relatives greeted the visiting doctors.
Anytime we hear about doctors come into the village, we make sure all of us are being seen. And we don't know a lot of times what they might do to us or anything like that. And we think that everybody come to help.
But these were not the sort of doctors who treated sickness. They were researchers, hoping to find ways to help American troops fight better in cold weather. In one test, native subjects were fed pills containing radioactive iodine-131 to determine if their thyroid gland enabled them to withstand cold weather better than other people. The doctors were able to recruit test subjects by impressing village elders with technology never before seen in the remote villages. But the Eskimos were not told that the experiment involved radiation.
most of us did not speak English too well. And we don't know what's going on. So now I know that it was not good for us. But at that time, we didn't know what's going on.
More than 100 Alaska natives were dosed with radioactive iodine as part of this study. Although many of the villagers believed the pills they were taking would improve their own health, the iodine-131 offered no prospect of medical benefit. The Inupiat chosen for the experiments were healthy individuals who would not have otherwise been exposed to this type of radiation. What the doctors left in their wake is a group of people who feel they have been deceived and taken advantage of.
About a year ago, we found out about this, and it was shocking. I was mad, and it's not knowing for all those years.
Florence Amawak recalls that the experiment involved more than just taking pills.
They did take some pictures of everybody. They say, take your clothes off. What else is there to do? And that's no good. That's not right.
This story was so shocking that CNN was prompted to produce a telecast exposing these experiments. Appropriate title, Eskimo Guinea Pigs.
Testifying before the President's Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, former North Slope Borough Mayor George Amawak revealed the stories of Eskimo men who were selected for further testing.
In a letter to me about the iodine experiments, a native named Wilford James Sr. relates, and I quote, "We were given iodine-131 and put in a small room lined with lead foil, naked and wired to all of our openings, ear, mouth, rectal, underarms, and so forth, until we shivered from temperatures dropping." Unquote.
The U.S. government still maintains that no physical harm was done to the test subjects. But the doctor's final report shows that each dose of radioiodine exposed the thyroid to the equivalent of 700 chest x-rays, and many subjects were dosed more than once. The doctors also gave the radioactive material to elderly men, children, and pregnant or nursing mothers, all clearly unethical, even by 1950 standards.
So when this film was completed, we sent one copy back to the commission in Washington, D.C., and they agreed to pay a hefty fee to every one of the experiment survivors on the one condition that we never, ever show this film. And it has never been shown. You're the first people to see it here tonight. There is a legal agreement between the government and the Native people, and there was some questions about the First Amendment and the government's ability to do that, but that was weighed against the really hefty fees that were paid to the victims and the survivors and their heirs. So this was a tangible thing that we were able to do, and this, was one of the films that Bill made that I'm talking about, that he used his talents for good. This is another film that he did, I told you about earlier, I think, where he went to Vietnam and covered the Friendship Village there. And this one's fairly self-explanatory, so I'll just get to the clip.
This is a story about heroes and friendship, and the new ties linking once bitter enemies.
It's an incredible, unique story because veterans who fought in Vietnam or were connected to the wars in Vietnam were now building something very unique and very positive, life-affirming, to help heal the worst victims of the war, namely the children who had Agent Orange damage.
Friendship Village, American veterans and Vietnamese veterans together. And yeah, it's a good idea.
Shaped like an elongated S, Vietnam stretches for 1,000 miles along the length of the Indo-Chinese peninsula and covers an area roughly the size of New Mexico. China lies to the north, Laos, Thailand, and Cambodia to the west, and the South China Sea to the east. This is Hanoi City, the People's Republic of Vietnam. The capital of North Vietnam and once the stronghold of a people we called the enemy. From Kennedy to Nixon, and from Tet to the Round Table, now almost 30 years later, a great deal has changed. Today it looks as though there never was a war. No napalm, no arclight, no DMZ. For the new generation of Vietnamese, the war with America is ancient history. Half the population was born after it ended. There are some signs of the war that happened here, but these relics are little more than a passing curiosity. Here in the Hanoi market, life goes on very much as it always has. The same foods are being bartered, the same language spoken, and the only difference between now and then is the age of the war veterans. Spiritual life is evident throughout Vietnamese society and culture. Buddhism, Confucianism, and Christianity are among the many faiths practiced here. The children here are just like children everywhere else in the world. They play in the streets, pile onto each other's bicycles, and generally act as if the world was designed for their pleasure. But not all of the children of Hanoi live in happiness. When you leave downtown, the sounds of laughing children fade quickly. Here, almost lost from world view, is the Vietnam Friendship Village project. At first glance, this appears to be an ordinary boarding school. But when you look closer, it's clear that these are not ordinary kids. These children suffer the legacy of a war they know nothing about. Evidence suggests that they are the victims of Agent Orange and other biochemicals used by the United States military. It was called Agent Orange because it was shipped to Vietnam in 55-gallon drums, marked with an orange stripe. It was the principal defoliant used in what the Pentagon called Operation Ranch Hand. Since the enemy hid under the jungle canopy, one way to force him into the open was to make the jungles disappear. 19 million gallons of chemical defoliants were sprayed over the densely forested jungles of South Vietnam.
So that was, when that film was completed, Bill saw to it that through the Veterans of Foreign Wars organization all over America, DVDs of this film were sold. Raised up over $100,000, which was enough to build a new building at Friendship Village to help youngsters. It turns out if you can catch these kids young enough that have twisted limbs and other problems, you can build prosthetics and braces for them so that the time they become teenagers, everything has been straightened out, and that's what they did in this building. So this is another example of a very tangible film that Bill did. So this is a clip from Tibet, A Moment in Time. You've heard earlier the talk about Tibet, and I'll tell you just a quick anecdote about this film. And Francine, if you could you come set this up a little bit for us? I know you were involved with it, and I know you narrated it, in fact. When Bill was in Tibet making this film, part of what it deals with is the Chinese that are encroaching into Tibet. And Bill was filming on a mountainside once, and literally the Chinese army marched right up to him. And they said, "You can't film here. You can't," waving their hands. Bill picked up his camera and he moved it about 5 feet, and he said, "Oh, what about here? Can I film here?" "No, no." "Well, what about if I was to put it over here? Would this be okay?" "No." Well, of course, the camera was running the whole time, and he got this wonderful sequence. Hi, Francine.
Hi.
Oh, could you just set this up a little bit? It's just a 5-minute clip.
Okay, I really don't know, that much about it, but what I do remember, at that time, nobody was allowed in to Tibet, and the fact that Bill had sort of worked his way in. I think he had to hide all of his camera equipment. He had to go. I don't know how he did it. But he also became very good friends with the Dalai Lama, and I think some of that has been mentioned before, and I think that you probably know more about the specifics. I did the voiceover, so I had the opportunity, of course, of watching this lovely film, and it is a beautiful film, and it's another one of his good works. This is what he was about, so.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Tibet. The roof of the world. The most spiritual place on earth. Where the past and present have met with the same force that lifts mountains. It is a land of shepherds watching over the world. The Tibetan people are caught between the past and an uncertain future. A land of people with an abiding love for the earth, for each other, and all humanity. Where nonviolence is the chosen path. Where the fruitful spirit of Buddhism casts its shadow across the centuries. The lessons of Tibet are far greater than we may imagine. For as Tibet goes, so eventually shall we all. The most spiritual place on earth. Tibet. High on the Tibetan plateau, the wrinkled crust of the earth rises like a boulder into the jet stream. From its high watershed come 10 major rivers that irrigate the lands of Asia. The 25,000-foot glacial peak of Namcha Barwa feeds the turbulent waters of the Yarlung Sangpo River. The Yarlung Sangpo has cut a canyon 19,000 feet into the earth. The river runs all the way into the Bay of Bengal. Tibet is bordered by India, Nepal, China, Burma, and 4 other countries. It is here, within the safety of the canyon, where Tibetans maintain a self-sustaining life, creating and growing all that they need.
I want to talk just finally about Bill's sense of humor a little bit, and then I have a quick clip of a greeting that was sent by a fellow named Brad Swenson that was a good friend of Bill's. And also I have some footage from this morning when Karen, Bill's daughter, and I went out with the help of a wonderful pilot named Paul Anderson, and we were able to shed his ashes over the Knik Glacier. And a beam of sunlight opened up in an otherwise overcast day, and it was just a beautiful experience. So, Bill had a wicked sense of humor, and you had to be around him long enough for him to sort of express that. We came back from a shoot once, and he had about 100 feet of film left in the magazine, and he said, well, let's not throw it away, let's burn it up on something. So I said, yeah, let's go out in your backyard and get some pictures of your birds. And Bill had done documentaries on birds and on insects and other things, had an encyclopedic knowledge of every breed of bird. And he knew I was teasing him. I said, hey, Bill, what kind of bird do you suppose that is? He looked up and he goes, that's a double-breasted mattress thrasher. He says, no, wait a minute. He said, I think that's a gimlet-eyed titwatcher. He said, no, that's a ruffled spouse. He and I were driving to Alaska Regional Hospital one time to film some mountain climbers who were severely frostbitten and were being medevaced into the hospital, and we were to be there to see them arrive as they got off the helicopter. And Bill, who was, punctual to a fault, was running late, and he said, you know what, I'll just stop by your house, I'll pick you up on the way there. Okay, fine. So I grabbed my camera gear, waited at the front door, jumped in his rig, and we go flying down East 20th. And he doesn't even stop. He gets to Lake Otis, and there's a stop sign there. He makes a quick glance over his shoulder and pulls right out onto Lake Otis, and it was not characteristic of Bill at all. And I thought, geez, I'm wondering, is he aware of what he just did? Right then he looked over and he said, well, stop there twice next time. So he knew exactly what he was doing. Oh, this is a bit of shameless promotion. I had a company at one time called Cinevision in Anchorage, and we would make commercials from time to time, and Bill helped with this one.
Hi. I got some tape here and film and stuff, and I'd like to get it transferred to a DVD. Can you guys do it for me?
Yes! Maybe you should take a closer look at Cinevision. We transfer film, videotapes, slides, and photographs to DVD video so the whole family can enjoy the memories. Maybe you should take a closer look at Cinevision.
Needless to say, we got that in one take. Needless to say. Okay, a quick greeting from Brad Swenson.
Hi, I'm Brad Swenson, and I'm a little nervous about being on this side of the camera. That's a great line from how Bill Bacon started the 1992 promo on his first trip to Tibet. The first time I got the opportunity to work with Bill. I'd like to thank all of you, first of all, for coming out here today to remember somebody who has touched so many lives, lives that you just can't even imagine the number of people that have been a part of Bill Bacon and everything he's done in cinematography and as a human. I met Bill in 1991 or 2, working on a commercial for Frank A. Randall. And Frank A. needed somebody to come in and say a few lines on camera, and Bill showed up in this rickety old pickup truck and kind of awkwardly said a few lines about reprographics, and afterwards he drove away. And I said to Frank A., who's that guy? And Frank A. said, you don't know who that is? That's Bill Bacon, the Alaska filmmaking legend. And it always struck me as an amazing kind of synergy that there's always the famous story about how Bill met Walt Disney, working as an assistant on the camera crew, and Bill's dog Nicky being of interest to the team, going over to meet Walt, and not knowing who Walt was, and later asking, well, who's that? And somebody from the Disney crew said, boy, you know who that is? You just met God. That's Walt Disney. And of course, that's how I felt working with Bill, getting to know him. He touched me on so many different levels. First, as a friend, as a mentor, and really as a father figure. It was absolutely mind-blowing for me when I got the call, when I heard the news that Bill had passed away, on the same day that my dad had passed away when I was a 13-year-old boy. You know, the thing about Bill was that no matter what we did, first of all, he always strove to do his best. He always worked hard to make sure that the product he delivered was going to be great. But he did it in a way that was humble and integrity-based. And that's something that I hope and I pray that becomes a hallmark of my life as I continue working in this craft. I'm sitting here today in this beautiful nature, about to spend a summer filming this slough and all the wildlife around here, and it couldn't be more perfect place for me to record this message about Bill. Of course, an amazing wildlife cinematographer, and again, just such a great guy. You know, his stories were legendary. I'll never forget, we were hired by Showtime to do a piece on roughhouse boxing in Alaska before a big pay-per-view fight or something. And the producer was sent up from LA, and after a shoot we were sitting at a diner, and Bill started telling a story about being on the North Pole. And he goes, so there I was on the North Pole with Lowell Thomas. And the producer from LA, who thought quite possibly he was working with a bunch of bumpkins in Alaska, goes, you know what? I have never heard anybody start a story like that. That was just one of thousands of stories that Bill could tell you in any circumstance. You know, I was reading the book How to Win Friends and Influence People not too long ago, and there was a big part in there about Lowell Thomas. And of course, the second Tibet film that Bill and I did, Tibet Hope, was narrated by Lowell Thomas Jr. And it's always been incredible to me how almost every aspect of my life that I shared with Bill has somehow connected to this larger world. Certainly working with the Tibetans, and later with the Dalai Lama himself. I mean, this is just from a kid from a little town in Minnesota of 1,000 people. It's pretty incredible that I've had this opportunity to know Bill. And again, more importantly, the things that he taught me as a human. I'm really grateful. And to all of you there, I send my love and respect. And thank you for including me in this. One last story. Recently I was in a conversation with some people, and one of the guys in the room was an 83-year-old retired doctor. And he goes, well, let me tell you about this guy that was famous for flying the wrong way. His name was Corrigan. And I said, yeah, Wrong Way Corrigan. That's how my buddy Bill Bacon got to Alaska. Thank you all so much. I love you all, and again, thank you for taking this time to remember one of the great people on this planet. Not just a great cinematographer, great filmmaker, but a great person. And I hope to someday live up to just a fraction of the incredible humanity that Bill Bacon shared with the world.
Okay, we have one more clip of Bill's ashes, but before we do that, I neglected to thank the good guys at the Alaska Moving Image Preservation Association who provided that Tibet clip to us, and I forgot to do that. I apologize. Okay, here's the last clip. I shot this with my phone, and between the tears and the trying to hold the phone, it wasn't easy, but here you have it. Thank you so much.
I was going to ask Steve Levi here, who knew Bill for forever and was a board member of the Alaska Moving Image Preservation Association for quite a long time with Bill, to sort of start us off.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I knew Bill Bacon from a completely different angle. I am not into film. I'm a writer, an historian. And I met Bill in the 80s when I was working on a biography of Archie Ferguson, who flew out of Kotzebue. Somebody said, oh, you got to talk to Bill Bacon because you know all these people in the Arctic. And so here I go talk to this white guy. And I started asking him, well, do you know some of these people here, like Chester Savak? Chester Savak is an Eskimo whose face is on the Alaska Airlines, the tail of the plane. He said, oh, yeah, here, I knew him, you know, here's a picture of him. And he also knew Claire Oakpia. Oh, Claire Oakpia was the native that saw the crash of Wiley Post and Will Rogers. And over the years, you know, every time I had a question on the Arctic or on Alaska history, I'd call him up, and I'm just absolutely amazed. He said, oh, yeah, I knew him. You know, he went out hunting, da-da-da, filming, da-da-da. And when AMIPA was formed back in about 1991, I said I wanted to be on the board as the historian. I don't know anything about film, but I do know a lot about history and where the documents are. And I said Bill should be there too, because he's the only filmmaker I know. And everybody said, hey, that's a great idea. And over the years, I have worked a lot with Bill, and a lot of times he would call me up and say, can you take a look and, you know, see what you can find on this. And he has been an absolute, treasure when it comes to history. For those of you that don't know who Wrong Way Corrigan is, in 1938, Corrigan flew from Los Angeles to New York, and he wanted to fly to Ireland. And they said, no, you can't fly to Ireland because you don't have navigation equipment, you don't have permission, so on and so forth. And so he said, okay, he was going to go back to California. And he took off and he said, well, gee, the weather was so bad, I didn't know where I was, and I misread my compass. And he ended up in Ireland. And that's why he's called Wrong Way Corrigan. And he was flying, he was one of the guys who actually put together the Spirit of St. Louis, so he knew what he was doing. And I'm being a writer and a historian, I also try to always finish with something that's very humorous. And when I was doing research on Archie Ferguson, I came across this article on Bill Bacon in like 1955. And I said, Bill, is this true? And he looked at it, he said, oh yeah, he said, that's true. And I said, well, what was going on here? And he said, well, what had happened about 1955, 56, the Air Force had contracted with him to go out and get something that had fallen out of a plane. And what they were going to do is they're going to fly him as close as they could possibly get to where it was and drop him off with the dog team and have the dog team go out and pick this up and bring it back to Elmendorf. And I said, okay, well, and he said, yeah. He said, well, with the dogs, we got the dogs out there, we put them in a warehouse out by the airport. And next morning about 3 a.m., what we did is we got the dog team into the plane to take off. And apparently those dogs had gotten into something in the warehouse. And they evacuated at both ends in that plane all the way out. And they dropped him off, and he went out and he got whatever he was, and he came back, and he was walking down the street in Anchorage, and this guy with a very short hair comes up and he says, are you Bill Bacon? And he said, yeah. And he says, well, if you ever put your dogs on my plane again, I will kill you.
As most of you, I knew Bill Bacon just as part of my life in Alaska. I would see him here and there, and always with the camera, always involved and always active. And I just want to thank those who organized today's presentations, who showed us the films, and it's a marvelous feeling to sort of live the life of Bill Bacon, to see his work, and especially the Disney stuff. That was just delightful. Thank you.
Bill was on stage at Jay Hammond's funeral. Every time I look up, he's like Zelig. He's like popping up everywhere. Who's got something to share with us? If nothing comes to mind, I will tell you the first time I met Bill. I was working at a place called Image Productions, and Anchorage had popped up back in the 80s when real estate was king and money was around. And I was the luckiest kid on the block as far as I'm concerned. I got to work in this post house that had $1 million worth of gear, and I would work there day and night, and I did. But we were doing this production called Ecosystems of the Great Land, and we were sort of stitching it together. Larry Holmstrom was running the place, and he couldn't help himself. He was a producer, so he would always he was sort of land jobs, and I'm not sure it was always the greatest thing for us as a business because we were trying to get filmmakers in, but they felt it was competition. But Larry would land these jobs, and so we were doing this thing called Ecosystems, and I was a neophyte out of Channel 11. I'd only been there a couple of years. I really didn't know what I was doing as an editor too much, but we needed to cover the shot of there was supposed to be a story about waterfowl, like duck eggs. And so there's a nest with ducks, duck eggs, and we're supposed to have a predator come in. And it's supposed to be a fox. And I was like, oh, this will never happen. We can't do this. We can't get this kind of footage. Where are we going to get this? And Larry's like, well, call Bill Bacon, see what he's got, you know. So I call it Bill, and he's like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, okay. And, you know, eventually he comes over, and he's got this little, like, 100-foot roll of film, you know, just clipped out. And he says, why don't you send this down, and if it works for you, great, and you know, pay for the transfer to video, and that's all. We'll just call it even. I'm like, okay, you know, cross our fingers. You know, it's a week later or something, week and a half. It comes back, threaded up in the video. So there's this nest with eggs in it, and a fox walks in, picks up an egg in its mouth, and walks out. And I was like, you know, it just occurred to me. Really, I was so stunned at the time that we were grateful that we had it, and I was blown away. And I said, who is this guy? And of course, got to know Bill later. But it only occurred to me that he might have actually had that shot. I mean, I always presumed that he had it in his collection, in his archives, but it's not, you know, Bill could have made that happen somehow in ways that I couldn't even fathom at that time. So this is probably about 1985, so. Anyone else?
So my name is Patrick Donnelly, and I was trying to be in the production scene in the late 90s. And I had some mutual friends, and I ended up meeting Bill Bacon, and we were talking about stuff. And I was headed to Valdez to go play with the contests and the snow machiners, and the snow machine scene was kind of a new deal then. Anyway, Bill goes, you need a camera? And I go, well, yeah, kind of. So he hands me an Arri S, which is not a cheap camera, 60mm film camera. And he says, bring it back. So I went down there and I shot stuff that wound up in some videos and played with the contest scene and had a great time. And I brought his camera back. And he said, thanks. That was it. So anyway, I just wanted to express what kind of a guy Bill was. And if I had a bunch more great stories, I'd tell him, but I don't.
One of the things I forgot to say, that if Bill had gotten caught with those cameras in China, he might still be in the jail there, because this is really serious stuff. But he did it, as we all know. And of course, that's one of the favorite films, that Tibet is just unique, you know.
I'll just jump in real quick and say one thing that Bill did say about being there was that he pretended to be a tourist. And that was part of how he made it happen, is he just carried this, you know, small video gear had sort of come about, and you could just wander around and pretend to be a tourist, but actually, as we know, he was much more than that.
I just wanted to let you all know that there are several people who contacted us tonight and sincerely wanted to be here. Larry Golden, who Bill worked with on Alaska at War and many other projects. Michael Walsh, who did a retrospective here at the museum last December, and also Brad Swenson, who he worked with on the Tibet films. But we'll hold him in our hearts. And Reed has generously offered to make copies of DVDs and distribute them to people. So if there are people that you know of that should be experiencing this as well, please make sure to give your information or contact addresses to Reed. Is that fine, Reed? Okay.
Speaking of that, I have a couple of notes from folks that were longtime filmmakers here that wanted to share some thoughts with folks. I spoke with Pamela Jennings and Bill Baker, which many of you may know. Pamela just flat out said, we loved Bill Bacon, and that's beyond measure for her. And Bill wanted to say, Bill says, I just admired his professional portfolio, really. And the fact that he could marry someone so close to the end of her life it says so much about him as a person, and folks better acquainted with his story will share more of that. But he had a partner who had cancer, and it, it was part of what we keep hearing about him as his humanity. So Bill Baker says, Bill Bacon is the human being I want to be if I ever grow up. If you know Bill Baker, he's another guy with some very serious humor behind him. Steve Chetnick writes from Atlanta, I wish I had known Bill Bacon better. I wish I had spent more time listening to his stories. I wish I'd worked with him, shared an adventure, seen how he'd line up a shot, light a scene, work with people in front of his lens. I wish I'd witnessed what would catch his eye when he arrived at a new place, and how quickly his camera would be rolling, and which lens he'd pick and why, and when to roll camera and when to cut, because film wasn't cheap. On occasion, I was privileged to help him with some equipment thing, usually something small, but every moment I did spend with Bill was lit brightly by the light in his eyes and that gigantic grin on his face. Forever enthusiastic, Bill was either just back from someplace wild or just heading out, camera in hand, to commit moments to eternity. Rest in peace, Bill Bacon. In a world of cameramen, you were a man with a camera.
Thank you. Mary Kotsky here. First time I worked with Bill was on Hurley for the House, Katie Hurley's campaign for running for the House, which she won. And the last time I saw Bill, ironically, I was working on a documentary called Backing Out of Time about Alzheimer's and dementia-related disease. And I ran into him in the parking lot at the place where we were filming. And that was the first indication I had that he might be facing something like that. It was a very touching moment. He did remember me. He still had that light inside, that bright, happy smile. Didn't know much else about what was going on, but that core was there, which is a wonderful lesson to see that your core might still be there.